everyone, and welcome back to my channel, where everything you're about to hear and see has been done in one take. I am your host, the One Take Man. I have to admit the reception on my last video wasn't exactly as good as I hoped it would be, and so therefore I won't be doing the Justice League video just yet. I do, however, want to do another video in a similar vein, except instead of talking about 5 movies, I'm only going to talk about one, and in a lot more detail. The movie in question being X-Men Apocalypse. What worked, what didn't work. I should explain that I actually am a fan of the X-Men. Have been since the days of the animated series. Movies are more of a mixed bag, but then again, you don't need me to tell me that. Suffice it to say, the movies before Apocalypse were pretty amazing, actually. You know, First Class really showed the potential this franchise could hold, and Days of Future Past absolutely fulfilled it. And I was very much looking forward to more X movies, especially after Apocalypse was teased as the villain for the next one. Because I've been looking forward to seeing Apocalypse on screen ever since X2. He was he is pretty much my favorite X-Men villain ever since I first saw him in the animated series. But I'll get into why a little bit later. For now, let's look at X-Men Apocalypse and discuss what worked, what didn't. Well, what didn't is actually the main conceit of the plot. Bryan Singer, I will respect him for what he tried to do. Namely, he wanted to approach how communities are built, and he wanted to do that based on 2 role models. One of them is Xavier, the other one is Apocalypse himself. Xavier is the model that of a community built upon mutual support and cooperation, and Apocalypse represents a community that is built upon the promise of power and order. So, at least in that movie. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is power and order aren't really Apocalypse's shtick. Oh, he has power, but that's the thing, he already has it. He doesn't need to or want to have any more power. And order is also not in the picture for him. In fact, one could describe his vision as absolutely chaotic, because he only sees the world in terms of who is strong, who is weak, and he wants the weak to die, and he wants the strong to test their strength over and over and over again. So every time, only the strongest survive. Regardless of how crazy that sounds, that is what he thinks is ideal, what he thinks societies should be. A constant strength challenge. So somehow Singer was unable to wrap his mind around this very simple villain motivation. He had to make it complicated. So, how do we do this movie instead? Well, we start off by waiting. Yeah, I know, a bit strange. However, Apocalypse is pretty much the Thanos of X-Men. He is one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe, and whenever he shows up, everything instantly becomes much more grand, much more important, because he is the guy pulling the strings, he is the guy you need to stop, and everything you do after that point becomes exponentially harder, exponentially more important. Precisely because, you have to prevent him from fulfilling that vision of his. So how do you make sure that you represent this struggle accurately? Well, you have to build an X-Men team who can later on go to challenge Apocalypse. And Days of Future Past doesn't really do that. And X-Men Apocalypse did not do that. It assumed this team already exists, but we didn't really have much of a connection to that. So, that is what we have to fix. And we fix that with an intermediate movie. An intermediate movie based on Mr. Sinister. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Sinister is another villain of the X-Men. He is actually a human who has conducted various biological experiments on both himself and other mutants. And the end result of these experiments is that he has granted himself various mutant abilities, among them immortality, and he has managed to surround himself with a loyal posse of mutant followers, the Marauders. And they've come into conflict with the X-Men every now and again. This movie should focus on the relationship between Mr. Sinister, Scott Summers, and Jean Grey. And the plot I have in mind is that Sinister runs an orphanage where he experiments on the kids, and is supported by some of the elder kids. And among the kids he experiments on or wants to use as lab rats are Scott Summers and Jean Grey. And the story goes on two fronts. On one hand, you see Sinister dealing with both his own experiments and his attempts to block various investigations into the dealings of his orphanage. And on the other hand, you get to see Scott Summers encouraging and building up his fellow orphans in order to create a resistance against Mr. Sinister. The plot would ultimately conclude when the X-Men themselves come to the orphanage and break everyone out with a little bit of help from the inside. The orphans who were under Mr. Sinister then go on to the next movie and become the team that would eventually face Apocalypse. In the post-credit scene of this movie, we either see several X-Men either going through Sinister's journals or reporting to Xavier on Sinister's journals. And in these journals, the long and short of it is that he was conducting his experiments precisely because he found out that there is a mutant who has been sealed away in ancient Egypt, and that he's creating an army or a group that would save the world or at least protect him should this mutant arise. So yeah, nice and ominous. Then we start the Apocalypse movie proper. We start at the excavation site of where Apocalypse's tomb is supposed to be located. We have an excavation team and the X-Men themselves who are in charge of security for this team. You get to see who these X-Men are, what their personalities are, and some of their interactions with each other and with the excavation team. We find out that there is some prejudice from the excavation team, particularly from their leader. And the actual day of excavation that we see ends with them opening the tomb. Important, I mean the tomb as in the chamber where the sarcophagus is located, not the sarcophagus itself. The lead archaeologist wants to open the tomb immediately, but the X-Men convince him after an argument that no, they should wait until tomorrow. The archaeological leader is like, fine, we'll wait until tomorrow, and then goes in the middle of the night to open the sarcophagus and kill the mutant, kill Apocalypse. And so he goes there, he opens the tomb, he gets ready to kill Apocalypse, but then Apocalypse stretches his hand out onto his head, grabs his head, and steals his life force and his knowledge of the developments of the world. And given he is an archaeologist, he would know a lot about that. Before Apocalypse gets to finish his job, the guy manages to shout. Both the rest of the team and the X-Men themselves come over to investigate. Apocalypse fights all of them off, kills most of the archaeologists, maybe even one of the X-Men, just to prove a point that he doesn't care about mutants over humans. He cares about the strong over the weak, regardless of whether or not the strong are human or mutant. So after he runs off and our good guys are left to tend to their wounds, the plot would pretty much focus on two parallel storylines. One of these is the X-Men training, making sure they improve their teamwork, so all the mistakes they did while trying to restrain Apocalypse don't occur again. Also Xavier tries to talk to regular governments in order to obtain support in his attempts to stop Apocalypse. And the other plotline would focus on Apocalypse himself gaining supporters. If you don't mind, I'm gonna concentrate on this plotline for this video. The first one he finds by wandering through the desert, and a girl with white hair and a lightning scar on the sole of her foot. Based on how she uses her powers, the audience will infer that she is in fact Storm. Apocalypse meets her, empowers her, and recruits her as his first horseman. The other horsemen he recruits are Jubilee. He saves her from a bunch of gangbangers. Sabretooth, he finds him wounded after a recent rampage. And Gambit. He finds him hiding from an angry mob after the Thieves Guild abandoned him. The plots converge again with the help of a certain Reverend William Stryker. For those who don't find the name familiar, Reverend William Stryker is the main antagonist of the God Loves, Man Kills storyline, which is about this Reverend who convinces his flock, his followers, that mutants are of the devil and should be destroyed. Yeah, it was the 80s. And I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to go into that yet. Point is, we see him holding a sermon in front of maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, and it is also transmitted live throughout the U.S. Among the spectators are some people at the X-Mansion and the Reverend's brother, who is a colonel in a military base that also happens to be close by. While the Reverend has his soaring ceremony, Apocalypse, Sabretooth, and Gambit bust in and just go to town on everyone, massacre everyone, kill everyone they can find. And they make particular note of giving the Reverend a gruesome death. Whether or not it will be shown is up to the studio to decide. After that is done, Apocalypse grabs a camera and gives his speech on how a new era is about to come, about how the strong don't have to hide from the weak anymore, and that he is going to march upon Washington. All who wish to join are free to do so. the colonel sees this speech and wants to mobilize all the people at the base in order to prevent Apocalypse from starting his march. However, Storm and Jubilee are at the military base and are absolutely going to town on everyone there. Maybe even detonate a nuke that happens to be stored at that base. And yeah, that is how Apocalypse declares both his intention and his power to the world. That lights a fire under the asses of the government and the military, who agree to support Xavier and his team any way they can, and they agreed that our forces should meet up somewhere just outside Washington. Just as they're about to head out, they are visited by Magneto and his Brotherhood. Xavier and Magneto have a brief exchange about other meetings they had that were less friendly than their current one, and eventually Magneto reveals that he is there because he recognizes Apocalypse is a really big fish that he can't fry on his own, and he wants to help Xavier in frying him. And they're like, okay, let's all go together to Washington. They go together to Washington. We see them, preparing their defenses, and eventually we see Apocalypse and the whole wave of supporters that happen to join him show up, and the whole third act is basically just one long battle scene with 3 rounds that kind of bleed into each other. First round is the foot soldiers on each side. So human soldiers against baseline mutants. They go to town. They go to town on each other. Some of the wounded get tossed aside. Eventually Apocalypse's horsemen get in the mix. The X-Men themselves and the Brotherhood members get involved, and that begins sort of round 2. Then after a while, at the beginning of round 3, Apocalypse himself joins the mix. At which point some of his followers might decide to turn against him because he is absolutely fucking brutal. And most of the efforts of the most powerful mutants are focused on him, and they barely keep him at bay. What finally kills him is a combined attack. First off, on a psychic end by Xavier, on the physical end by Magneto, and both of these are supported by Jean Grey, whose Phoenix powers are now emerging after they have been latent in the past 2 movies. Then after Apocalypse is defeated, the Brotherhood disperses, a lot of the mutants also disperse, some surrender, and we pretty much arrive at the same status quo we were at when the first X-Men movie was due. So yeah, I'm wrapping up the series in a nice little bow. I hope you enjoy my pitch, and I hope to see you again soon. Once again, I have been the One Take Man. Thank you very much for your attention.